In this video, we're going to look at marker properties, peak excursion and peak threshold. Let's put on a marker here at peak. And if I say peak right, it went somewhere down in the noise. I didn't really want that peak. I wanted these two peaks. But it considers those peaks. Eventually it gets there, but I don't really want those. That's where the marker property peak threshold is valuable. This says it's an absolute value. It's saying if it's below minus 100 dBm, consider it a peak. What I want to say is my noise level is around minus 75 here. If my signal is not at least minus 75 dBm, don't consider it a peak. So if I say peak left, it finds this one, then it finds this one, then it finds this one. Now it's not going into the noisy signals. We can even experiment further, and now this is around minus 65 dBm. If I change my peak criteria to, let's say, 55, and I do peak right, it goes to that one. But if I keep pressing peak right, it doesn't go any further because I have set a threshold of minus 55 dBm. So that's what simply the peak criteria, the peak threshold does. Now I'll show you what peak excursion does. Let's change this back to minus 90, which is the default level. And peak excursion is a little bit easier to see if we're looking at the noise, so I'm going to change my center frequency. I'm going to use the knob here to move it kind of. That's a noise level. And let's zoom in on a scale. I'm going to move it up in the middle of the screen and change the scale.
And maybe you could target rolling it on.
Let's do the minus 80 dBm reference level. Down a bit. Okay. Now I say marker to peak. It found that peak. I'll go ahead and say peak left. So I have a scale of 2 dB per division. And it's picking up all these peaks. Let me change the marker properties, peak excursion. The default is 6 dB. Okay. Now if I do peak left, it's picking this one up, but notice there's a peak here. It skipped this one. You see this little peak? If I do peak right, and then peak left, it skips this. And the reason is this small peak, the difference between the peak and the valley on both sides, it happens to be on the right side, is maybe 3 dB. You see, because it's got about 1.5 division, so it's going to ignore that. If I make my peak excursion 1 dB, and now I go peak right, it picks up this peak. Let's say I want to ignore this peak. On the left side is 1, 2, 3, 4, 4.5 divisions. Let's say 5 divisions, and that's 10 dB. So if I set up my peak excursion to 10 dB, and I do peak right, it's going to skip this peak now. See, it didn't pick up this peak because this difference is 9 dB, which is less than the peak excursion of 10 dB. So threshold is kind of the level where you want to ignore things above, and excursion has to do with the valleys on both sides. And you can use those criteria to define it when you make a marker table that shows you your various peaks.